we can move on to the second part of the day, which is the college lecture. May I invite Dr. Anindhu Patirana, my co-chair, to the stage, please? So the college lecture each month is themed and in collaboration with the sister college of the Ceylon College of Physicians. And this month, sister college is the Sri Lanka College of Cardiology. So I'm very glad to have Dr. Anindhu Patirana, President of the Sri Lanka College of Cardiology, as my co-chair. And obviously, therefore, the college lecture is a cardiology-based topic. So may I invite Anindhu to introduce the speaker and get on with the sessions.
So, good afternoon to all of you. First of all, let me thank Ceylon College of Physicians for collaborating with Sri Lanka College of Cardiology and inviting us for this college lecture. And it is my pleasant task to introduce the speaker today. He is Dr. Aruna Vijayasinghe, and he graduated from Colombo Medical School in 2008. And after that, he obtained his MD in 2015 and MRCP UK in 2016. And after being board certified as a specialist in cardiology, now he is acting as a consultant cardiologist at the base hospital Panadura. And today he is going to speak about a very common and relevant topic for the practicing cardiologist as well as for the specialist in the internal medicine field. And he's going to talk to us about insights into the current management of heart failure. So over to you, Aruna.
So during next half an hour, we are going to discuss about what is heart failure, how to diagnose, and mainly this lecture will focus on management of heart failure and prevention of development of heart failure. And I will briefly discuss, if time allows, our role in optimizing optimized care for heart failure in Sri Lanka. So what is heart failure? Heart failure is a clinical syndrome. It is characterized as signs and symptoms plus cardiac dysfunction. It can be the systolic dysfunction or diastolic dysfunction. So according to ESC guideline, it is defined as symptoms plus signs with signs and some additional features. Heart failure divided into three categories. What we commonly know is heart failure with reduced ejection fraction, that is ejection fraction less than 40. Initially, this was known as systolic failure. Now there is another two categories, heart failure with medium range ejection fraction and preserved ejection fraction. Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction is EF more than 50 and mid range it is 40 to 50. So when we have to diagnose for the reduced ejection fraction, we have only two criteria, first and second one, that is symptoms plus or minus signs plus echocardiography or other evidence of low EF less than 40%. But if you want to diagnose mid-range or preserved EF heart failure, we need additional criteria apart from clinical features and echo findings, that is either elevated levels of BNP or at least additional imaging criteria to support structural dysfunction. It can be left ventricular hypertrophy or valvular heart disease, or it can be diastolic dysfunction. So during this next half an hour, I will mainly focus on the management of heart failure with reduced ejection fraction because we have enough evidence to talk about this topic. For the management of heart failure with medium range and preserved ejection fraction, there are not much evidence and it's still a gray area. So when we come to the diagnosis algorithm, most of the patients come with clinical features, either shortness of breath, mainly shortness of breath. There are a lot of other symptoms and minority of them will have physical signs such as rales, bilateral ankle edema, murmurs, increased JVP or other signs, but only in advanced heart failure. When we come to the diagnosis, there are three main investigations we have to focus on. One thing is ECG, mostly neglected in investigation. BNPs, we rarely do it because it's a bit expensive, and echocardiogram. I would like to highlight that ECG is very essential because if the ECG is completely normal, it makes heart failure very unlikely. It doesn't exclude, but sensitivity, it says sensitivity is around 89%. That means completely normal ECG. There are no ST changes, Q waves, or abnormal T changes. So this is a very important thing. Whenever you see a patient and suspecting heart failure, you can do a ECG, very cheap and commonly available. And if it's completely normal, very unlikely that this patient has heart failure. Then the next most important investigation is BNP. Currently, this is not done very frequently because of the cost. But in next couple of years, this will be the most important investigation in heart failure diagnosis. This has a very high negative predictive value, 0.94 and 0.98. That means if this is normal, we can virtually exclude heart failure, whether systolic, mid-range or diastolic. This is basically more sensitive than our current echocardiogram because we are not very good in diagnosing diastolic dysfunction. Even most of the, including myself and most of the cardiologists, we are not very interested in diastolic dysfunction, and we screen through the echoes but not thoroughly do diastolic function assessment. So this will be the most important investigation in couple of years time. And just you don't have to remember the cutoff value, but remember cutoff for chronic heart failure is lower than cutoff for acute heart failure. There are a lot of other investigations. I know you all basic investigations. I don't go through them. And when it comes to the causes, commonest causes will be ischemic heart disease. So it accounts for 60 to 70%. And this shows from the Framingham study, diabetes has come up and role of importance of hypertension and valvular heart disease has gone down. This is in developed countries, but I think in Sri Lanka, still coronary heart disease, hypertension and diabetic are very important, and it's on the rise. But valvular heart disease, thanks to our reduction in rheumatic valve disease, the contribution for heart failure is going down. The prevalence, when you come to the prevalence, this is a disease of elderly. As we advance in age, the prevalence increases. Why heart failure is important? Because this is the number one cause of hospital admission. Number one cause of hospital admission after 65 years of age. And unfortunately, patients who are admitted to the hospital and discharged from the hospital, of them, 50% will readmit within next 6 months. So this is the commonest cause for recurrent hospital admission in developed world and our part of the world as well. But unfortunately, we don't have any data. And according to the current statistics, 1 in 5 of us will develop heart failure if we manage to live beyond 65. And the worst part is people who are admitted to hospital with heart failure, and out of them 50% will die within next 4 to 5 years time. So mortality is very high, and it's higher than the common cancers such as breast CA and prostate CA. The mortality and prognosis is roughly equivalent to colorectal CA. So having heart failure is equivalent to having a colorectal CA. When we come to the heart failure stage and mortality, this is not the NIHA classification for shortness of breath. This is a heart failure stages classification done by American College of Cardiology. Stage 1 and stage B, they have very good prognosis. But stage 1 is people have no heart failure, that increased risk such as diabetic, hypertension or dyslipidemia, obesity and family history. Stage B, they have no heart failure. Clinically, they don't have heart failure, but they have structural abnormalities. These are the people with asymptomatic people with ischemic heart disease or LVH or valvular heart disease, or some people with diastolic dysfunction but still asymptomatic. They don't have symptoms, but structural abnormalities there. But still these two groups, mortality survival benefit is very good. Prognosis is excellent. But when we come to the clinical heart failure, the prognosis goes down, and when this is the stage 4, NIHA category 4, it's a very bad prognosis. So as doctors, our aim should be to prevent the progression of this stage from A to B or B to C or C to D. From house officer to the medical officers, consultant, registrars and healthcare workers. This is the most important thing we have to do for our patients. Then ejection fraction and mortality, it is very clear. Lower the EF, higher the mortality. And this is a very interesting slide. You can see this slide, they have compared 62 countries with high income countries and 135 low income countries. The population wise, 18% live in these rich countries and 82% live in poor countries. And the rich countries spend 63,000 million for heart failure, and all 135 poor countries spend only 1,500 million, so 40 times higher. So heart failure is very expensive and very rich area. That's why lot of people are investing on it, because there are a lot of money in that. So when we come to the management, the most important things are to improve the mortality. That's what we want. But if you take a patient with heart failure, NIHS stage 3 or 4, they don't want to live longer because they are anyway dyspneic, they can't manage their day-to-day life, their quality of life is poor. So they don't want to live longer, but what they expect from us is to improve their quality of life. Not everybody want to live longer. The asymptomatic patients, most of us, and stage 1 and 2, yes, they want to live longer, but majority, other people, they want to improve the clinical. So that's the main target of heart failure management, to improve the mortality and improve the survival, improve the clinical status and quality of life. In addition, hospital admissions are very important because they reduce the quality of life, but not only quality of life, they are very expensive, both to the patients as well as to the government. We don't give much value to the human life in this part of the world, but if you take the developed countries, the normal hospital bed per day will cost around 600 pounds, but heart failure bed will cost more than 1,200, very expensive, so they are very interested in reducing admissions. So these are the common drugs we use in heart failure, and I am very sure you all are well up to date than myself regarding these drugs. The commonly used drugs, ACE inhibitors or ARB, beta blockers, and SGLT2 inhibitors. These first three drugs used for all patients with heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. And selected patients, there is a place for MRA, that is mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, ARNI, angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitors, ivabradine. And for symptomatic control, we use diuretics. It can be either HCT, furosemide, or metolazone, or vasopressin receptor antagonist. I'm not going to talk much about it, but this is especially useful in advanced heart failure where patients has a resistant edema and hyponatremia. Not only in heart failure, any disease with resistant edema and hyponatremia. These drugs, in small letters, there's a place for heart failure, but nowadays we rarely use them. ISD and hydralazine combination, it has survival benefit in selected patients, especially black people. Digoxin and polyunsaturated fatty acid, they reduce survival, not the survival, but symptoms and hospital admissions. But nowadays we rarely use these drugs because of the side effects and intolerability. So this slide shows all the clinical trials done from 1987 to 2014 paradigm heart failure trial, the last one. Ivabradine shift trial is not included in this graph. So you can see the thickness of the line is proportionate to the number of studies and hence to the level of evidence. So there are a lot of evidence for ACE inhibitors, ARBs, beta blockers here, and MRAs, and there's one study for ARNI. So when we come to the ACE inhibitors, and we will discuss the first three drugs, and then we move on. When we come to the ACE inhibitors and ARB, the enalapril and losartan, commonly available drugs in government sector, we think both are the same, interchangeable. It is not so. Just remember there is enough evidence to support that ACE inhibitors are superior in ARB. This is a meta-analysis published in BMC Cardiovascular Journal 2017, and it shows ACE inhibitors are superior to ARB in the mortality as well as other parameters. When we come to the diabetic, not for diabetic nephropathy, but cardiovascular outcomes, still ACE inhibitors are better than ARB. Not only in heart failure, diabetic also, but not for diabetic nephropathy. This is for cardiovascular outcome studies. Even in hypertension, ACE inhibitors are preferred over ARB. This is the one important thing you have to remember from today. ACE inhibitors are better than ARB. And this is not only meta-analysis. If we go through the guidelines carefully, this is AACC guide, American College of Heart Failure Guideline, published in 2017. This says ARB for who are intolerant to ACE inhibitors. So place of ARBs on if the patients are intolerant to ACE inhibitors. When we go to ESC guideline in 2016, they don't mention ARB in the main table, but in the small letters they say if ACE inhibitors are not tolerated or contraindicated, use ARB. This is the ACC and ESC guidelines. Not only meta-analysis, there are enough evidence to support ACE inhibitors are superior to ARB in terms of heart failure and other cardiovascular outcome reduction in hypertension, ischemic heart disease, heart failure, and diabetic. So there are lot of ACE inhibitors are available in the market, but commonly available in Sri Lanka, enalapril and ramipril. And there are no significant differences between these two if you use equivalent doses. So this is very important thing. In the heart failure, there is another concept I will discuss, the maximum tolerable dose. So we should not stay on enalapril 2.5 daily. We have to gradually increase to a maximum tolerable dose. If we go to the maximum tolerable dose, either enalapril and ramipril are both equally effective. And there is another meta-analysis published in Medicine. They use multiple ACE inhibitors, and this meta-analysis, enalapril might be there are no strong evidence, but there is a trend towards enalapril in terms of reduction, improving ejection fraction, stroke volume, and decreased mean arterial pressure. So this is the mortality over 10 years follow-up, ramipril and enalapril. So there is no much difference. So despite this evidence, these are not recent evidence from 2016 ACC guideline and ESC guideline 2016, still ARB the most prescribed drug in Sri Lanka. And when it comes to the ARBs, not all ARBs are licensed for heart failure. There are mainly the candesartan, valsartan, and losartan. It's true that there are some evidence for telmisartan as well, but still ACC and ESC has not approved, Europe and America not approved these drugs. So basically, when it comes to heart failure, the commonest drugs are not the ACE inhibitors. When it comes to ARB, losartan, candesartan, and valsartan. So then we go to the beta blockers. Beta blockers has 3 generations. First generation beta blockers are non-specific ones such as propranolol. There's no place for heart failure. These are second generation beta blockers, bisoprolol and metoprolol. Second generation means they are selective beta blockers. And third generation beta blockers are beta 1 plus alpha 1 blockers, carvedilol and nebilol. These 4 drugs have shown benefit in heart failure only for these beta blockers. And remember, when it comes to metoprolol, it's a metoprolol long-acting one. That is metoprolol succinate, not the metoprolol tartrate short-acting one. Metoprolol tartrate has failed to show any survival prognostic benefit in heart failure. So what is available in government sector most of the time, it is metoprolol tartrate. It has no place in heart failure management, and it's a metoprolol extended release or long-acting one is the one. And so carvedilol and nebivolol, carvedilol also available in government sector, bisoprolol also available, metoprolol also available. This is an important slide. I think as most of you have to aware about what is number needed to treat and relative risk reduction. If you go through the relative reduction in major trials, basically all beta blockers have around 30 to 40% relative risk reduction, and number needed to treat is more or less similar except for nebivolol. So when we compare what is the best beta blocker, there are good evidence to say that carvedilol, metoprolol, succinate, not tartrate, and bisoprolol, all 3 have equally beneficial in heart failure and equally reduce mortality about 30% over 1 year time. And nebivolol is less effective. So when we come to the beta blockers, the commonest obstacle is patients are on inhalers. So whenever the patient starts with shortness of breath, they go to a GP or consultant or maybe a cardiologist, and then patient will be started on an inhaler. And then after many years' time, it is very difficult to identify whether they are true asthmatic or not. So when a patient, because most of the heart failure patients you see in our clinical setup, at least government sector, we see they are on inhalers. So the beta blockers are very good. It is the most effective drug for heart failure. And so because of inhalers, we should not we have to use it, but we have to be careful. So there's a trial in beta blockers in COPD. It shows beta blockers were associated with reduced all-cause mortality. And if we use cardio-selective ones, that is beta-1 selective, it's a second generation or third generation beta blockers, they are associated with reduced risk of COPD exacerbation. This is a large randomized trial involving more than 40,000 patients. Not randomized trial, meta-analysis involving more than 40,000 patients and published in European Heart Journal. So the beta blockers are very safe in heart failure, COPD. And this is a Japanese study and a Taiwan study. And these two studies shows bisoprolol is better tolerated than carvedilol, but they are only small studies. But basically you have to remember is either carvedilol or metoprolol succinate or bisoprolol or nebivolol all are safe in COPD. And just because patient is on an inhaler, don't put beta blockers away. At least give a trial and see. You can challenge it small dose of bisoprolol or carvedilol 3.125 and see whether they develop any worsening of symptoms. Most of the time these inhalers are started for shortness of breath caused by heart failure. Previously it was known as cardiac asthma, not for true bronchial asthma. So this is the third drug I want to discuss, SGL2 inhibitors. Actually, this has been the market for 20 years, and thanks to FDA law, this became a cardiac drug more than the diabetic drug. It's basically, you all know, it is a sodium glucose co-transport. It causes glucose urea and diuresis. But more than diuresis, it has a lot of actions on heart and this list of mechanisms. And after 2016, there's a lot of interest on these drugs. There are a number of trials you can see, empagliflozin, dapagliflozin, then canagliflozin, and then newest drug is sotagliflozin. So all are more or less equally beneficial in heart failure. Empagliflozin and dapagliflozin is the available drugs for heart failure in Sri Lanka. And if you see, it's a significant primary outcome of heart failure significantly reduce it, but when it comes to the cardiac death, there is no significant reduction, 7.6 and 8.1. But remember, these follow-up for only 18 months, and so in 5 years' time, this can change. So just because it doesn't show mortality benefit, I am not going to say it is inferior to dapagliflozin. In contrast, dapagliflozin, there is a cardiovascular mortality benefit, 6.5 and 7.9. So both drugs can be used for heart failure, irrespective whether empagliflozin has mortality benefit or not. So these three drugs, ACE inhibitors or ARB, beta blockers and SGL2 inhibitors, are all three indicated in all patients with heart failure unless they are contraindicated. And then in selected patients, imagine patients are still symptomatic and LV function is less than 35%, there is a place for MRA, mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. There are two mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists available in Sri Lanka, spironolactone and eplerenone. Both are more or less equally effective, and these 4 trials have shown there are significant benefit for mortality as well as symptom control and hospitalization. Number needed to treat for 1 year is around 14, 13, 20, 25. But these are really good drugs. Just remember, when we compare studies, we can't use number needed to treat to compare studies. This is the newest drug available in the market, ARNI, angiotensin receptor neprilysin inhibitor. Actually, this has a very limited place. Main indication says patient has to be symptomatic and there has to be optimal medical treatment. There has to be ACE inhibitor or ARB, beta blocker and mineralocorticoid receptor. And despite optimal medical management, there has to be symptomatic and LVEF has to be less than 35. Then there is a place for ARNI. We know when the patients develop heart failure, there are poor adaptive mechanisms and good friendly adaptive mechanisms. Poor adaptive mechanisms are handled by ACE inhibitors and beta blockers and ARBs and mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. Poor adaptive mechanisms are vasoconstriction and fibrosis, aldosterone, RAS mechanism activation. The friendly adaptation is the increased level of ANP, BNP and other vasoactive peptides. These peptides actually help to adapt into the heart failure by enhancing vasorelaxation and natriuresis and reduce fibrosis. However, until recently, we tackle only these bad adaptive mechanisms, but we found there is a new drug, a new agent, by inhibiting neprilysin. What this neprilysin does is increase the metabolism of ANP and BNP. By inhibiting neprilysin, we can increase the concentration of ANP, BNP, and other vasoactive peptides, which are actually friendly for heart failure. So this drug, ARNI, act in two ways. One, by inhibiting suppressing this bad adaptation and enhancing the friendly adaptation. So currently only one drug is patent, that is Entresto. It's reduce the mortality as well as symptoms, improve the quality of life and hospitalization. And currently it's not available in the Sri Lanka legally. It's available in selected pharmacies, and it will be available in next year probably, but still expensive. This is the number needed to treat for major heart failure drugs groups, but these are based on specific studies. So basically you can see beta blockers has the best benefit, but I told earlier we can't compare multiple different studies with number needed to treat, and more or less others all have less than 20. And then ivabradine, this is also overprescribed drug in Sri Lanka for heart failure. It is not a first line drug. There are specific indications. The main indications are patient has to be symptomatic, LVEF has to be less than 35, and sinus rhythm has to be more than 70. The most important thing is the patient has to be on maximum tolerable beta blocker, not carvedilol 3.125 BD and heart rate is 90. You should not start beta blockers. We have to up-titrate the beta blocker to a maximum tolerable dose, or they has to be contraindicated for beta blocker. Then you can start ivabradine. It is a funny channel blocker, sodium channel blocker, and it inhibits the SA node and reduce the sinus rate. But it won't affect blood pressure, no effect on vasculature, inotropic activity. And if you go through the mortality and the primary endpoint, they will say they improve the primary endpoint, both cardiovascular death and hospital admissions, statistic significant manner. However, if you go through different factors, there is no significant effect on mortality, only for hospital admission, because this primary endpoint reduction basically driven by reduction in hospital admission and not by cardiovascular death. So ivabradine, there is no significant mortality benefit, and subgroup analysis for certain subgroups there is a mortality benefit, but overall people there is no significant mortality benefit from ivabradine. This is from SHIFT trial. So then now I would like to come to this maximum tolerable dose. By all studies, this is a very important concept. You have to up-titrate drugs to the maximum tolerable dose. Commonly the restricting factors are the blood pressure. Blood pressure is 100 or 90, it's acceptable level, and the heart rate can lower it up to 55 or 60. So beta blockers. So gradually increase it, and this chart from ESC guidelines give the maximum tolerable dose. Captopril I personally don't like because it has to be given TDS. Except captopril, all other ACE inhibitors and receptor blockers can be given daily. Even enalapril, losartan, everything can be given daily or even BD dose. And remember, enalapril, it is 10 BD or 20 BD. Carvedilol 25 BD, bisoprolol 10 daily, nebivolol 10 daily. Losartan 150 daily, eplerenone 50 daily, spironolactone 50 daily. So at least in government sector, because drugs are provided free of charge, you can increase up to maximum tolerable dose. Remember it. It is very important for heart failure prognosis. Diuretics, I am not going to talk much about diuretics because you all know about it. It has no mortality benefits, but they reduce the symptoms and reduce the hospital admissions. Mainly the common diuretics we use are HCT, furosemide, metolazone, more potent diuretic. And as I mentioned earlier, tolvaptan, if there is a significant hyponatremia and resistant edema. I would like to come to the last part of the things. Then the cardiac rehabilitation. Cardiac rehabilitation is a very underutilized method. It's a medically supervised exercise program, but apart from exercise, we educate them on healthy living and we do counseling as well. So until recently, this improves symptoms and hospital admissions, and there is no survival benefit. And this is a very low cost because we use only humans, and humans are very cheap in Sri Lanka. But recent study done in Japan, the good, well-controlled study shows cardiac rehabilitation per se has some mortality benefit. There's a trend towards the mortality benefit. This is total events, and this is the mortality. So this is a very underutilized method, and in future, I think most of the base hospitals and teaching hospitals, we can establish more and more cardiac rehabilitation programs. And for the completeness, the ICD, these are very expensive, cost more than 1 million. But for selected patients, this is really good. The main indication for this for primary prevention, ICD indications are ejection fraction has to be less than 35 despite optimal medical management. Optimal medical management means all heart failure drugs with maximum tolerable dose, NYHA class 2 or 3. Class 4 people have mortality less than 1 year, so we are not going to give ICD for them. Expected survival has to be more than 1 year. This is for primary prevention. Secondary prevention, there is no limit for ejection fraction. Anybody has a life-threatening VT or high risk of VT decided by a cardiac electrophysiologist will be eligible for ICD implantation. Then the CRT. CRT again will be beneficial for selected patients. This is even expensive than, this is also very expensive, cost more than 1 million. So it's in sinus rhythm patients, ejection fraction less than 35 despite optimal medical management, and prolong the QRX complex duration, more benefit. So if at least it has to be more than 130, but if it's more than 150, it will be more beneficial. LBB pattern, patients with LBB pattern will benefit more than patients with non-LBB pattern. And again, patients with NYHA class 2, 3, 4, even including 4 can be benefit from CRT because this improves the symptoms. ICD won't improve the symptoms, they will improve the survival. CRT, there is a survival benefit, that more than that, there is a symptomatic benefit. And this is the most interesting part for cardiologists, revascularization. Yes, definitely the revascularization improve the heart failure, survival, as well as symptoms and hospitalization. But this is only for selected patients with documented, well-proven ischemia, not for everybody with ischemic heart disease. And there are a lot of evidence to support CABG improves more than PCI, but there are separate criteria. So I am not going to discuss those things. For selected patients, either PCI or CABG will improve the survival as well as symptoms and hospital admissions. For cardiologist point of view, viability is important, but there are no good evidence to support that assessment of viability is important for revascularization. There's one large trial, STITCH trial, and they started trial in 2016 and published in 2011. Now 10-year follow-up in 2019. Still they failed that in the viability assessment is not important in revascularization. When we come to the prevention, the most important thing is, as I mentioned earlier, we want to prevent the progression and development. Always prevention is better than treatment and cure. So we have to prevent people getting heart failure. So most important thing is risk factor control of hypertension, dyslipidemia, diabetic, smoking, obesity, active lifestyle, and diet. Those are much more important and easier than, not easier, but important than drug management. And when you come to the drug management, there is a definite place for ACE inhibitors and ARBs in CVD in the absence of heart failure. And there is a place for SGLT2 inhibitors with patients with diabetic and established CVD irrespective of EF. Even EF is more than 50%. The patient has established CVD, that means either by angiography or other clinically non-STEMI or STEMI, or even unstable angina. Unstable angina then has to be good diagnosis, not the atypical chest pain and troponin negative minor T inversions. But the well-diagnosed unstable angina, that is definitive CVD, irrespective of ejection fraction, if the patient is diabetic, SGLT2 inhibitors will be the first line treatment for diabetes after metformin. So anybody with ischemic heart disease and diabetic, SGLT is a must. And PCI, there's a definite place in acute coronary syndrome. The benefits, we are not very sure what's the place of coronary interventions in chronic coronary syndrome for heart failure prevention. I mentioned about the risk factors. So the final slide, I want to emphasize you that in our practice, use the maximum tolerable dose. Then other thing is ACE inhibitors are preferred over ARB. 20% of the people will develop side effect for ACE inhibitors, but 80% won't develop. So there is a big window for ACE inhibitors. And cardiac asthma, inhalers, COPD, they are not contraindication for B. And always think about the cost of the drug when you prescribe, because this is a very lifelong disease and they have to take very frequently. So if you are going to prescribe a very expensive ACE inhibitor, expensive ARB, just think whether there are cheaper versions available and is there really benefit. What drive you to prescribe drug, whether it is the real evidence or the support you get from the particular drug company. So just think about it when you are prescribing. And if there is any questions, I would like to answer.
This question was sent to the Zoom chat box. And can we use SGLT2 inhibitors for non-diabetic patients with heart failure? Wouldn't it cause significant hypoglycemia?
Yes, definitely. Irrespective of the trials, this Emperor, Survive and DAPA heart failure, both trials have shown that the SGLT2 inhibitors are effective irrespective of diabetes in patients with heart failure EF less than 40%. So one thing, and there is theoretically they can cause hypoglycemia, but there are small cases, but not significant. Another thing is, as I mentioned earlier, yes, that's a part. Yes. So you don't have to worry about hypoglycemia, but remember this cause glucoseuria. So glucoseuria means you invite for UTIs and very rarely Fournier's gangrene. Trials have not shown much in the DAPA heart failure trial. Only one patient developed Fournier's gangrene and it's in the placebo arm, not in the control. But in the clinical practice, I have heard several patients had Fournier's gangrene in NHSL. So it can be our hygiene, and we have to advise them to take fluid and take in the morning better than taking in the night. If you can, the common hygienic practice will be more important if you are giving SGLT2 inhibitors to prevent UTI and Fournier's gangrene.
So, in the absence of any other questions, let me thank Dr. Aruna for his excellent presentation, giving us a nice overview about this very important clinical syndrome. Thank you very much, Aruna.
Thanks.
And let me, at
yes.
the same time, let me invite President-elect of CCP, Dr. Arosha
Aruna, one moment,
to
Aruna. You have to
hand over token of certificate. Yeah.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the CCP, may I congratulate Dr. Aruna Vijayasinghe on an excellent presentation, as well as thank Dr. Anidu Patharna for chairing this session. Dr. Sanjeeva Rajapaksa, who is the CCP representative, at least the CCP colleague from the College of Cardiology, for coordinating this effort. Then we wish to thank the ClinMark support staff, the AV team, and of course Dr. Priyamali Jayasekara, who heads this college lecture and YPF program. So thank you very much, and it is my great pleasure on behalf of the CCP to present this certificate of appreciation to Dr. Aruna Vijayasinghe. Thank you, Aruna.
Thanks.